What if Superman landed in Warhammer 40k? The day the sky tore open, they said the Emperor had returned. It was the third shift on Hive World Mordian Prime when the smog clouds split like rotten flesh, revealing something impossible. Golden fire, pure, clean, radiant light that hadn't touched this world in 10,000 years. The Underhive workers dropped their tools. The mid-spire merchants fell to their knees. Even the Arbite's patrol units froze, their shock mauls lowering as they witnessed what their training manuals said could not exist. A star was falling, not crashing, falling with purpose, with grace, cutting through the industrial black like a sword through shadow. The air screamed, metal groaned, and then he landed. The impact crater was warm, not scorched, not irradiated, just warm. Like the embrace they tell children about in ecclesiarchy tales, the touch of the God Emperor before the darkness came. The figure stood in the center, tall and broad, wrapped in colors that had no place in the Imperium. Red and blue, primary, simple, a cape that moved in wind that shouldn't exist in the recycled air of the Hive. His eyes were the worst part, not augmetic, not gene-modded, just blue, human blue. But they glowed with something that made even the most faithless menial remember the word hope. The tech priests arrived first, their mechadendrites chittering in confused binary, scanning for radiation signatures that refused to make sense. One muttered a prayer to the Omnissiah, another screamed and fled. Within the hour, the planetary governor received 17,000 Vox reports, all saying the same thing, all using the same forbidden word: miracle. The administratum scribes who logged the reports were executed by week's end, their bodies burned to ash in the furnaces that never stop consuming. But the word had already spread, through voxcasters and datastream, through whispered prayers and hand-scrawled graffiti in the Underhive tunnels. The God Emperor had sent an angel, a being of light, to save them from the grinding dark. The Astra Militarum mobilized. Tanks rolled through streets, crushing servitors and citizens alike in their haste. Commissars executed deserters who claimed they'd seen divinity. And in orbit, the Inquisition's black ships turned their auger arrays downward, scanning, calculating, preparing their verdict. He called himself Kal-El. The name meant nothing in Gothic. The lexicographers ran it through every database from Terra to the Eastern Fringe. Eldar, negative. Tau corruption, negative. Chaos-tainted warp echo, scanning, inconclusive. The Mechanicus dissected his speech patterns, analyzed the molecular structure of his skin from atmospheric scraping, measured the gravitational distortion his presence created. Every test returned the same impossible result: human, baseline human, unaugmented, unmodified, yet capable of feats that made Astartes look like children playing with wooden swords. He lifted a collapsed manufactorum beam that would have required 3 sentinels. He moved faster than picked captures could record, and when the governor's enforcers opened fire, the bullets stopped in the air like insects hitting glass. He caught them, all of them, let them fall harmlessly to the ground. Then he smiled. That smile broke the Imperium's heart before the Imperium even knew it should be afraid. It was genuine. Not the Richter's grin of a space marine mid-charge, not the calculated political mask of a Lord Commander, just honest kindness radiating from a being who had no reason to be kind. He began to speak, and his voice carried across the Vox networks without technology, pure and clear as temple bells. He spoke of peace, of ending suffering, of a better tomorrow where children didn't starve in the dark while their parents worked until their hearts gave out. He spoke words that had been deleted from imperial lexicons centuries ago: justice, equality, freedom. The crowd that gathered numbered in the millions, and they began to weep. The ecclesiarchy declared an emergency conclave within 6 hours. Cardinals screamed at one another across ornate tables, their faces red beneath their golden masks. Some claimed this was the second coming, the Emperor's will made manifest to save humanity in its darkest hour. Others spat accusations of heresy, of Xenos infiltration, of chaos corruption wearing the most insidious mask of all: hope. The sororitas prepared for war. The Canoness Superior locked herself in prayer for 3 days, emerging with eyes red and verdict clear. Test him. If he was divine, the Emperor would protect him. If he was false, his corpse would burn. Either way, the Imperium would have its answer in blood and ash, as it always did, as it always must. In the Underhive, a mother held her dying child and prayed to the blue-eyed angel she'd seen on the grainy picked screens. In the Mid-Spire, a scribe altered a single data log, changing miraculous intervention to unexplained anomaly, knowing that small change would save his family from the purge to come. In orbit, an Inquisitor watched the planet through a viewport, his fingers drumming against the exterminator's key he wore on a chain around his neck. And in the crater, Kal-El looked up at the stars, at the galaxy spread before him like broken glass, and wondered why every face he'd saved looked at him with the same expression, not gratitude, terror, as if kindness was the cruelest thing he could have offered them. The Imperium has 10,000 years of experience dealing with gods. It kills them, chains them, worships them until they break, but it has no protocol for a god who simply wants to help, no contingency for power without cruelty, no doctrine to explain why a being of such impossible strength would kneel beside a starving child and offer food from his own hand instead of demanding worship. That was the moment the Imperium realized the truth. This was not a savior. This was a test, perhaps the cruelest test the galaxy had ever devised, because in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And hope. Hope is just heresy wearing a cape. If you want to see how the Imperium breaks even the strongest gods, subscribe and join us in the darkness. Drop a comment. Would Superman survive the Inquisition's judgment, or would even the Man of Steel learn to kneel? The Inquisitorial dossier arrived on Terra 3 weeks after first contact, sealed with 7 wax seals and a purity oath signed in blood. Inquisitor Castor Varni of the Ordo Hereticus had compiled 400 pages of testimony, picked capture analysis, biological scan data, and witness interrogations. Most of the witnesses were dead by the time the dossier reached the High Lords. Standard procedure. Can't have civilians spreading uncorroborated miracle stories across the Imperium, but the data remained. Cold, clinical, impossible. Subject designation, Kal-El. Height, 2.1 meters. Weight, inconclusive gravitational sensors, malfunction in proximity. Genetic structure, baseline human, unaugmented, 0 warp taint detected. Threat assessment, Omega level priority. Recommendation, immediate termination or containment. The High Lords read it in silence. One laughed. It was not a laugh of humor. The Mechanicus archives painted a different picture, written in the cold logic of binary cant. Magos biologist Hexron Null had obtained tissue samples through methods the Inquisition didn't approve for 6 more months. The cells were human, completely, undeniably human, but they drank radiation like other cells drank oxygen. Exposure to the system's yellow sun caused molecular restructuring at a rate that defied every law of biology the Mechanicus had catalogued in 10,000 years. The Magos hypothesized a lost colony, perhaps from the dark age of technology, where humanity had evolved under different stellar conditions, gene crafting beyond even the Emperor's work. The report concluded with a single line that made every tech priest who read it pause. Subject may represent apex human evolution. Recommend preservation for study. Do not destroy. That recommendation was stamped rejected in red ink the same day. Some knowledge is too dangerous even for the servants of the machine god. The Ultramarines were the first Astartes chapter to make contact. Captain Titus of the 2nd Company approached with a tactical squad, bolters lowered but ready, and found Kal-El in the ruins of a collapsed administratum building. He was digging, not with servitors, not with machinery, with his hands, pulling tons of rockcrete away like it was paper, following the sound of crying that Titus's auto-sensors barely registered. A child, buried for 3 days after a structurally deficient tower collapsed, another acceptable loss in the Imperium's endless grind. Kal-El pulled the girl free, checked her vital signs with a gentleness that made the Space Marines uncomfortable, and handed her to a medici team that hadn't even arrived yet. He'd voxed them himself, somehow, without a vox unit. When Titus asked him why he'd saved 1 child in a city of billions, Kal-El looked confused, as if the question itself was incomprehensible. Because she needed help, he said. Titus reported the encounter as proof of Xenos infiltration. The Ultramarines Librarius disagreed, This was something worse. Genuine altruism. The first miracle happened on the 73rd day of his presence. A plague ship, one of Nurgle's festering gifts, breached the orbital defense grid and crashed into the lower hive levels. 60,000 infected within hours. The standard Imperial response was already in motion. Seal the sector, burn it, bury it, deny it ever existed. The Sororitas purge teams were loading Promethium tanks when Kal-El appeared in the quarantine zone. No environmental suit, no protective prayers, just him and the rot. He moved through the infected like death's opposite, and where he touched them, the corruption burned away, not with fire, with light, pure, clean, impossible light that made the Nurgle demons scream and dissolve. 3 hours later, the infection was gone. 60,000 people sat in the ruins, weeping and whole, staring at the angel who'd done what the Imperium never could. He'd valued their lives over efficiency. The Ecclesiarchy declared it a miracle. The Inquisition declared it unsanctioned psychic activity. Both agreed he had to be stopped. The propaganda machine turned its gears with the precision of a manufactorum assembly line. Across 6 sectors, voxcasters broadcast the same message in endless rotation. Beware false prophets. The Emperor alone is salvation. All other light is heresy's lure. Picked captures of Kal-El were altered, enhanced, made to look sinister. His smile became a predator's grin. His eyes glowed with warp flame instead of simple blue. Sermons painted him as a test of faith. Would the faithful cling to the Emperor or be seduced by easy salvation? Cardinal Ignatius Thorn delivered the most damning sermon from the Cathedral of the Blessed Martyrs. He offers hope without sacrifice, salvation without suffering. This is not the imperial truth. This is the lie that damns galaxies. When salvation comes without cost, it is purchased with your sou. The crowds listened. The crowds believed. Because in the Imperium, suffering is currency, joy is debt, and hope is fraud. But the people didn't care about dogma when their children stopped coughing blood. They didn't care about theological correctness when their factories ran without losing workers to exhaustion every shift. Kal-El didn't ask permission from the planetary governor to repair the water reclamation systems. He just did it. Didn't request approval from the administratum before distributing ration supplements to the starvation sectors. He bypassed every system, every chain of command, every sacred bureaucratic ritual the Imperium was built on. And with each act of kindness, each impossible feat of genuine care, the Imperium's foundation cracked a little more. Because the Imperium doesn't run on hope, it runs on fear and faith, and the understanding that suffering is inevitable. If one being could simply remove suffering, what was the Imperium's purpose? What justified the tithes, the conscriptions, the grinding sacrifice? This wasn't salvation. This was revolution wearing a red cape. The turning point came when Governor Matthias Kroll ordered the execution of 300 factory workers for inefficiency, standard practice. The manufacturum quotas hadn't been met, someone had to burn as example, and workers were the cheapest resource. The firing squads assembled in the central plaza, broadcast live across the hive to ensure maximum deterrent effect. The workers knelt, the lasguns charged, and then he was there. Kal-El, standing between the condemned and their executioners, hands raised, not in threat, but in plea. He asked them to stop, to choose mercy, to see the workers as human beings instead of production units. The governor's response was transmitted across every channel. Fire. 300 lace guns discharged simultaneously. 300 las bolts stopped 3 centimeters from Kal-El's chest, their energy dissipating like rain on stone. He caught the light, absorbed it, then released it into the sky as a pillar of gold that could be seen from orbit. The workers lived, the executioners fled, and the Imperium realized its weapons were useless. That night, in the halls of the inquisitorial fortress, Castor Vane made his final entry in the dossier. His hand shook as he wrote, an unusual occurrence for a man who'd ordered the deaths of billions without hesitation. Subject represents existential threat to imperial doctrine, not through corruption, not through violence, through the simple demonstration that the Imperium's cruelty is unnecessary. If the people believe salvation can come from something other than the Emperor, the entire edifice collapses. We have held humanity together for 10,000 years through shared suffering and the promise of martyrdom. This being offers them an alternative. He must be eliminated, not for what he is, but for what he proves is possible. The dossier was sealed. The verdict was set. The Imperium had studied hope long enough. Now it was time to crucify it. The war began without a declaration. No formal announcement, no broadcast from Terra, just orders filtering down through the Administratum's endless bureaucratic chains, coded in the bland language of imperial necessity. Unauthorized miracle worker, designation Kal-El, threat level, Omega, eliminate by any means necessary, collateral damage, acceptable. Acceptable meant everything, cities, continents, entire populations if required. The Imperium had perfected the mathematics of acceptable loss over 10 millennia. One life, even an impossible one, wasn't worth destabilizing the faith of trillions, so they sent the angels. Not his kind of angel, the Emperor's. Angels, the Adeptus Astartes, 6 companies from 3 chapters, Blood Angels, Ultramarines, and the Black Templars. 300 of humanity's finest warriors, gene-crafted and indoctrinated to be perfect instruments of the Emperor's will. They came to Mordian Prime with a simple mission: bring him in, alive if possible, dead if necessary, forgotten if convenient. Captain Titus led the initial assault, not with hatred, but with the cold certainty of a man following orders he didn't necessarily understand. They found Kal-El in the Underhive naturally, distributing food rations to refugees from a sector collapse. He saw them coming, could have fled. Instead, he set down the supply crate and waited, hands visible, posture non-threatening. Titus gave him one chance. Kal-El, you are hereby detained under inquisitorial authority. Submit to imperial custody or face termination. The response was delivered with that same incomprehensible kindness. I understand you're following orders, but I can't go with you. Too many people here need help. Titus nodded, expected. Then he gave the signal. 50 bolters opened fire simultaneously. The sound was thunder in the confined space. The bolts never landed. Kal-El moved like light-made flesh, catching rounds mid-flight, redirecting them into walls, moving between trajectories that should have been unavoidable. He disarmed 3 Space Marines without hurting them, just took their weapons. Gently. That gentleness made the Blood Angels furious. Brother Sergeant Dante of the 5th Company had fought demons, tyrannids, and traitors across 6 war zones. He'd never been disarmed by someone who apologized while doing it. The Black Templars saw it as mockery. Chaplain Grimaldus declared Kal-El's refusal to kill proof of corruption. No pure being would show mercy to those who served the Emperor's justice. They escalated. Power weapons, melter guns, thunder hammers swung with enough force to crack tank armor. Kal-El dodged or blocked them all, his expression growing more pained with each attack. Not from injury, from sorrow. He was sad that this was happening. That made it worse. The Astartes were engineered to feel limited emotion, but even they recognized the insult of pity. When Brother Castiel charged with a chainsword and found himself gently placed back on his feet 10 meters away, completely unharmed, the Marine removed his helmet. His face was red with shame. "Why won't you fight us?" Kal-El's answer echoed in the Vox network. "Because you're not my enemy." The Imperium disagreed. If he wouldn't fight the Astartes, perhaps he'd fight for the civilians. Standard siege doctrine, take hostages, force compliance. Governor Kroll authorized the operation personally, his voice dripping with bureaucratic satisfaction. Subject shows pathological attachment to civilian populations. Exploit this weakness. The artillery batteries positioned outside the refugee sectors weren't aimed at Kal-El. They were aimed at the 300,000 people who'd gathered in his presence, seeking food, medicine, and the alien concept of safety. The ultimatum was simple: surrender or they burn. Kal-El appeared on the ramparts before the Vox message finished transmitting. He'd heard the artillery crews loading shells from 5 kilometers away. He could see the trajectory calculations in the fire control systems. He knew exactly what was about to happen, and he made his choice. When the order to fire came, he became a shield. Not metaphorical, literal. He spread himself across the kill zone, moving faster than human eyes could track, intercepting every shell, every missile, every drop of death the Imperium poured down. For 17 hours straight, the Imperium poured enough ordnance into that sector to level a fortress monastery. Kal-El caught it all, redirected it into the sky, absorbed the explosions against his own body. He didn't tire, didn't slow, just kept saving them over and over, while the civilians watched and wept and finally understood why the Imperium feared him. He proved something unforgivable. That protection didn't require sacrifice, that life could be valued over duty, that maybe, just maybe, the Emperor's plan wasn't the only way. When the bombardment finally stopped, not because they wanted to, but because they'd exhausted 3 armories, Kal-El stood in the center of the refugee camp. Not a scratch, not even breathing hard. Around him, 300,000 souls stared at the smoking artillery positions and made a choice. They knelt, not to the Emperor, to him. The heresy had begun. The schism spread like plague across the sector. Within weeks, 17 worlds had declared themselves protectorates of the true light. Planetary governors who'd ruled through fear for decades found their authority evaporating as populations refused to comply with tithes, refused to send their children to the Imperial Guard, refused to accept that suffering was necessary. They'd seen an alternative. Kal-El tried to stop it. Vox messages broadcast across every channel, begging them to remain loyal to the Imperium, to not start a war in his name. They didn't listen. How could they? For the first time in their lives, in their ancestors' lives, in the Bunt Khatis, 1,000 years of grinding darkness, someone had shown them that mercy was possible, that they mattered, that their children's lives had value beyond conscription quotas. The Imperium responded with the only language it truly spoke: virus bombs, orbital strikes, entire hive cities reduced to glass, and Kal-El couldn't save them all. That's what broke him the first time. Not the fighting, not the betrayals, the math. He was one being, impossibly powerful but still singular. The Imperium was a galaxy-spanning machine with 1 million worlds and quadrillions of souls. He saved a city. They burned 3 more to punish the survivors. He prevented a massacre. They executed entire subsectors for witnessing his interference. Every life he saved cost 100 more in imperial retribution. The Inquisition had calculated it perfectly. They couldn't kill him directly, but they could drown him in guilt, make every act of heroism a trigger for atrocity. The Vox message from Inquisitor Vane was delivered on every channel, timed to broadcast while Kal-El pulled survivors from a virus-bombed city. Every death here is your fault, false angel. Every widow, every orphan, every pile of ash that used to be someone's child. This is the price of your mercy. This is what hope costs in the real galaxy. Surrender yourself, or watch us burn 1,000 worlds in your name. The propaganda broadcasts that followed were masterworks of psychological warfare, picked captures of the virus-bombed cities, edited to show Kal-El's symbol, the strange diamond on his chest, painted on the walls. Testimony from survivors claiming he'd promised salvation and delivered only ash. Ecclesiarchy sermons painting him as a test, a trial the Imperium was failing by showing weakness. Cardinal Thorne's words became the rallying cry for billions. The false angel proves our unworthiness. We wavered, we hoped, we forgot too. Hat in darkness, we must become darkness to survive. The Emperor forgives this moment of weakness, but only if we prove our faith through fire. The faithful listened, the zealots mobilized, and across 100 worlds, neighbor turned on neighbor, brother on sister, as those who still believed in the Imperium purged those who dared to hope. The hope wars had truly begun, and Kal-El, floating above a burning city with ash on his cape, finally understood. In this galaxy, kindness wasn't just impossible, it was weaponized. The historians would later call it the Schism of Broken Light, though most records were purged before the name could spread. At its peak, the Civil War consumed 47 sectors and killed more humans than the Third War for Armageddon. Not from Xenos, not from chaos, from themselves. The Imperium fought the Imperium, faithful against faithful, both sides screaming prayers to the same God-Emperor while they burned each other's worlds. But they weren't really fighting over theology. They were fighting over a question the Imperium had buried for 10,000 years. Does humanity deserve mercy, or does it only deserve to survive? Kal-El never wanted to be the answer. He'd tried to stay small, to help quietly, to change things one person at a time. The Imperium made that impossible. It forced him onto a stage where every choice became galactic precedent. Every saved life became a declaration. Every act of kindness became rebellion. The False Angel wasn't a title he chose. It was one the galaxy hung on him like chains. The cults emerged first, not the organized chaos variety, but something stranger and perhaps more dangerous. Desperate people worshipping a figure who kept telling them not to worship him. They called themselves the Lightbringers, the Hands of Hope, the Children of Tomorrow. Names that would be erased from history with such thoroughness that even mentioning them would earn execution 3 centuries later. They didn't build temples, they built hospitals, distributed food without requiring prayer, taught children to read without ecclesiarchy supervision, simple acts that the Imperium classified as sedition. Because if you could have mercy without faith, what was faith worth? The Inquisition's purge teams worked around the clock, burning entire city blocks to kill a single cell of believers. It didn't matter. For every cultist they burned, 3 more appeared. People who'd seen what kindness looked like and couldn't unsee it. You can kill a man. You can't kill hope once it's taken root. The Adeptus Mechanicus observed all of this with the cold curiosity of scientists watching a fascinating plague. Archmagos Dominus Call himself issued a confidential report to Mars that was immediately classified Omega Black. In it, he theorized that Kal-El represented a form of social contagion more virulent than any biological weapon. The subject doesn't corrupt through chaos, he corrupts through possibility. Every demonstration of his power rewrites the human understanding of what can exist. Every act of altruism challenges 10 millennia of conditioning that suffering is necessary. We have built our Imperium on the foundation that cruelty is survival. He proposes an alternative equation. If his alternative spreads, our civilization, already teetering, collapses not from external threats, but from internal rejection of its own core principles. The report concluded with a recommendation that terrified even the High Lords. If they couldn't kill Kal-El, they needed to make him kill, prove he was human, make him compromise, force him into the mud where everyone else lived. The trap was elegant in its cruelty. Subsector Ultima 7, 12 billion souls, 3 hive worlds in close orbit. The Inquisition allowed a chaos cult to fester there, deliberately, feeding it resources through shadow networks until it reached critical mass. Then they leaked intelligence to Kal-El, not directly, through a child, a girl from the Underhive who'd been healed by his touch months ago. She came to him crying, clutching a data slate showing pict captures of demonic possession spreading through her home sector. 12 billion people. The Imperial fleet was 3 weeks away. The demons would consume them all in 5 days. Kal-El could save them. But there was a cost the Inquisition had carefully arranged, leaving Mordian Prime undefended. The moment he departed, the inquisitorial fortress would execute Order Exterminatus, virus bomb the entire world, kill the 10 billion believers who'd gathered there under his protection, save 12 billion strangers, or protect 10 billion faithful. Choose. The trolley problem on a galactic scale. The Inquisition watched his choice like scientists observing a crucial experiment. He chose to split himself, literally, moving so fast he could be in 2 places nearly simultaneously, racing between Ultima 7 and Mordian Prime every few seconds, saving families here while stopping executions there, fighting demons while disarming inquisitorial agents, spread so thin that for the first time since arriving in this galaxy, people could see the strain on his face. He saved them, both worlds, all 22 billion souls. It took him 6 days without rest, without pause, his body absorbing las fire and warp flame and virus toxins until his costume was scorched and torn. He saved them all, and the Inquisition learned something useful. He could be exhausted, not killed, but tired, made to hurt, made to bleed, if only a little. The reports went out across every inquisitorial fortress in the segmentum. The false angel could be worn down. They just needed more trolleys, more impossible choices, more dilemmas where every answer was drenched in blood. They would drown him in empathy until he either broke or became like them, cruel, necessary, human. The Eldar watched these events from the shadows of the webway with expressions that ranged from amusement to horror. Farseer Eldrad Ulthran convened an emergency council of seers, their infinity circuits flickering with visions of branching futures. In some timelines, the false angel succeeded in reforming the Imperium from within, creating a humanity that no longer fed chaos through endless suffering. Those timelines ended with humanity's extinction within a century, too soft to survive the galaxy's brutality. In other timelines, he failed and was corrupted, becoming a god of tyranny worse than the Corpse Emperor. Those timelines ended in galaxy-spanning war. In a few rare paths, he simply left, fled the galaxy, and the Imperium collapsed into civil war that consumed everything. The Eldar's conclusion was unanimous. The false angel was a crisis point, a fulcrum upon which the fate of the galaxy balanced, and like all crisis points, it would resolve itself in blood. The question was whose blood and how much. They chose to do nothing. Sometimes the best move is to watch your enemies destroy themselves. Chaos, however, refused to stay passive. The four gods convened in the warp, or, as close to convening as beings of pure contradiction could manage, and studied this anomaly that shouldn't exist. Khorne saw a warrior who refused to kill, insult. Tzeentch saw plans that relied on simple honesty instead of manipulation, confusion. Nurgle saw a being who healed instead of accepting entropy's embrace, rejection. Slaanesh saw power without indulgence, strength without pride, boredom. Together they reached a rare consensus. The false angel was incorruptible through standard means, but perhaps he could be corrupted through his virtue. If he wouldn't fall to vice, make him fall to excess virtue. Push him to save so obsessively he becomes tyrannical, make mercy into madness. The chaos cults received new orders. Don't fight him, worship him, twist his message, claim his name while committing atrocities. Make him responsible for evil done in his image. It was Tzeentch's favorite game, corruption through good intentions, the slow transformation of savior into tyrant. The breaking point approached faster than anyone anticipated. It came on the world of Sanctus Prime, a cardinal world where 10 trillion souls gathered for the feast of the Emperor's ascension. The Chaos cult struck during the celebration, releasing a gene plague that would kill 90% of the population within hours. Kal-El arrived in time to stop it, neutralizing the plague with his heat vision, burning the infection out of the atmosphere itself. He saved them, all 10 trillion, and they responded with the purest expression of imperial faith. They declared him the Emperor reborn, refused to believe otherwise, built statues, rewrote prayers. The Cardinal Primus himself, tears streaming down his aged face, knelt and proclaimed the second coming. Kal-El begged them to stop, told them he wasn't divine, wasn't their emperor, was just someone trying to help. They smiled at his humility, called it proof of his godhood. Within a week, Sanctus Prime had renounced terror. Within a month, 30 systems followed. The Imperium's response was immediate. The Phalanx itself, the Imperial Fist's fortress monastery, moved into position above Sanctus Prime, and Kal-El, standing on the cathedral steps while billions prayed in his name, realized he'd become exactly what the Imperium feared, not a savior, a schism. The message came through channels that shouldn't exist, quantum encrypted and delivered simultaneously to every Voxcaster Kal-El had ever interacted with. It bore the seal of the High Lords of Terror themselves, not a threat, an invitation. You have been summoned to account for your actions before the masters of mankind. Come to Terra, come alone, come willingly, and the purges stop. The Phalanx withdraws, the virus bombs remain unfired. Refuse, and we reduce Sanctus Prime to molecular ash. You have 6 hours to comply. It was signed by Lord Commander Militant Alexei Kreuger, and countersigned by every High Lord, even the Fabricator General of Mars. This wasn't a military operation. This was the Imperium itself, speaking with one voice for perhaps the first time in centuries. Kal-El read the message while standing in a plaza where children played for the first time in their lives without fear. He looked at their faces, at their mothers who no longer expected them to die before adolescence, at the old men who'd lived long enough to remember hope was possible. Then he looked up at the phalanx, its weapons hot and ready. The math was simple: his pride or their lives. He'd never been good at choosing himself. The journey to Terra took 3 days, though for Kal-El it could have taken 3 hours. He flew slowly, deliberately, giving the Imperium time to track him, to verify he was coming alone and unarmed. Not that he could be unarmed. His body was the weapon, but he made himself vulnerable in every way that mattered. No rescue plan, no backup, no demands, just surrender, clean and absolute, broadcast across every Imperial channel so the believers would see and perhaps accept that their age of hope was ending. The Inquisition shadowed him the entire way, 3 battle barges maintaining weapons lock, their commanders sweating despite the climate control because they knew their weapons were useless, but orders required the show. When he passed the Cadian Gate, the Eye of Terror pulsed with something that might have been laughter. When he crossed the segmentum solar boundary, the Astronomicon itself flickered, as if the Emperor's light was recoiling from what approached. And when he finally entered Terra's orbit, every defense grid, every orbital plate, every weapon system from the age of the Great Crusade locked onto him, silent, waiting. They brought him down in chains, not physical chains. He'd have broken those without thinking. These were psychic restraints, forged by an entire choir of Grey Knights channeling their power in unison, 50 of the Imperium's most powerful psychers, burning their life force to create bindings that pressed against his mind like a mountain. It hurt, not his body, his soul, the pressure of their combined will, desperate and terrified, trying to hold something that shouldn't need holding. He let them, walked into the Sanctum Imperialis in shackles of light that sizzled and sparked, following the custodian guard through halls that had never been meant for anything not born of terror. The High Lords waited in a chamber that existed in no official records, deep beneath the Imperial Palace where the walls were still original stone from before Unity, 12 thrones arranged in a semicircle, 12 of the most powerful humans in the galaxy, and in the center, an empty 13th throne that everyone was desperately trying not to look at. The throne that hadn't been sat in for 10,000 years. Lord Commander Kreuger spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd ordered the deaths of billions and slept soundly after. You stand accused of heresy, sedition, and crimes against the Imperium so numerous that reading them would take 6 months. You have destabilized 47 sectors, caused the deaths of trillions through civil war, and corrupted the faithful from their holy duty. Worse, you have done all this while claiming benevolent intent, making you the most dangerous kind of heretic, the one who believes himself righteous. Kal-El stood in silence, his blue eyes meeting each High Lord in turn. The master of the administratum couldn't hold his gaze. The ecclesiarch's hands trembled. Even the fabricator general's mechadendrites twitched with what might have been fear. They weren't judging a criminal, they were judging a concept, and concepts are harder to kill than men. When Kal-El finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle. I only tried to help. The chamber erupted in rage. Help! The Grand Provost Marshal slammed his augmetic fist on the throne's arm. You call starting the largest civil war since the Horus Heresy help? You call teaching the masses that their suffering is unnecessary help? The Imperium runs on sacrifice, on understanding that individual lives mean nothing compared to species survival. You've taught them their lives have value. Do you understand what you've done? You've made them question everything. If one being can simply remove suffering, why do we need the tithes? Why do we need the conscriptions? Why do we need the Imperium at all? The other High Lords nodded, their faces grim. This was the real trial, not of Kal-El's actions, but of the Imperium's foundational lie. For 10,000 years, they'd maintained that cruelty was necessary, that the grinding horror of imperial life was the only thing keeping humanity from extinction, and he'd proven simply by existing that it might be a choice, not a necessity, a choice. The inquisitorial representative, an ancient woman whose name had been classified for security, leaned forward. We've studied you extensively. Mechanicus biologist reports, psychoanalyses, even consultation with Xenos sources we'd rather not admit exist. The conclusion is unanimous. You're not corrupted, not in any traditional sense. No chaos taint, no Xenos influence, no genetic deviation from baseline human template. You're just good. Genuinely, incomprehensibly good. And that's precisely why you're so dangerous. She gestured to a hololith that displayed casualty figures. 17 trillion dead in the Hope Wars, 30 systems in open rebellion, 6 Space Marine chapters on the brink of splitting, the ecclesiarchy fracturing, all because you demonstrated that the Imperium's cruelty is a choice, not a necessity. You proved we could be better, but we can't be better. The galaxy won't let us. We tried once. It ended in the age of strife. This darkness, this cruelty, it's not what we want. It's what we need to survive. Kal-El listened to every word, his expression unchanging, and then he did something none of them expected. He agreed. You're right. The chamber fell silent. I've seen enough of this galaxy to understand. The Tyranids devour. The Orcs live for war. Chaos corrupts. The Eldar watch and judge. There's no room for mercy here, no space for kindness. I was wrong to think I could change that. I was wrong to offer hope in a place where hope is poison. He looked at each High Lord again, but this time his eyes were different, sad, ancient, as if he'd aged 10,000 years in 3 months. So I surrender, completely. Execute me if you want. Lock me away. Erase every record of my existence. Tell the believers I was a demon, a trick, a test they failed. I'll accept any punishment you decree. Just promise me one thing. He paused, and the psychic chains binding him crackled with the force of his emotion. Promise me the purges stop. That Sanctus Prime lives, that the people who believed in me aren't punished for my failure. Blame me, execute me, but let them live. The High Lords exchanged glances. This wasn't the response they'd prepared for. They'd expected defiance, rage, perhaps even violence that would justify immediate termination. Instead, they got something more dangerous. Genuine sacrifice. Christ on his cross, offering himself for his flock. And they understood immediately what that meant. If they killed him now, he became a martyr. The believers would multiply, the schism would deepen. But if they accepted his surrender, if they made him complicit in the Imperium's cruelty, if they forced him to watch as they did nothing to change the system he'd tried to fix, they could break him differently. Not his body, his spirit. Make him understand that in this galaxy, even gods learn to compromise. Lord Commander Kreuger leaned back in his throne, a smile touching his arid face. We accept your surrender, but execution is too kind, too clean. You wanted to help the Imperium? Very well. You will serve, on our terms, under our command, and you will watch as your hope dies slowly, eroded by the very reality you tried to deny. The trial was over. The real torture was about to begin. They assigned him to the Departamento Munitorum, not as a weapon, as a logistics asset. The first assignment came 3 days after his surrender, delivered by a nervous administratum clerk who couldn't meet his eyes. War Zone Octarius. Tyranid Hive Fleet Leviathan versus Orc War. Grax. Imperial Guard casualties 93%. Ammunition resupply delayed by warp storms. Estimated time until complete guard collapse 14 days. Your task, deliver 6 million tons of munitions from Forge World Metallica to the front lines. Time limit, 72 hours. It was impossible by any conventional means. The warp route was compromised. Standard ships would take months. But Kal-El wasn't standard. He could fly through the void, carrying cargo that would require 100 transports. So he did. 3 days of continuous flight through hard vacuum, pulling containers of ammunition behind him on mag tethers. No rest, no pause. Arriving at Octarius just in time to watch the munitions he delivered being used to hold a line that was already broken. 93% casualties became 95%. The line held for an additional week. Then it collapsed anyway. The ammunition he'd risked everything to deliver ended up in Tyranid bellies and Orc scrap piles. He saved nothing, extended the suffering by 7 days. The second assignment taught him the Imperium's true genius for cruelty. Famine on Agri-World Harvest Prime. 16 billion people starving because a single administratum clerk had filed the wrong form, redirecting food shipments to a sector that didn't exist. By the time anyone noticed, 3 billion were already dead. The Imperium's response was standard. Let them die, easier than fixing bureaucratic errors. Kal-El's orders were different. Distribute emergency rations to all 16 billion survivors. Ensure 0 additional casualties. Time limit, 9 days. He did it. Flying between continents, moving faster than orbital mechanics, delivering food to every settlement, every refugee camp, every isolated family. He didn't sleep, didn't stop, just flew and delivered until his hands were shaking and his vision blurred from exhaustion he'd never experienced before. 9 days later, every survivor had food. 3 days after that, the administratum correction came through. The food shipments were rerouted back to Harvest Prime. Normal operations resumed, and Kal-El understood. They'd used him to do what their own system should have done, made him complicit in maintaining a machine that killed billions through paperwork errors. He'd saved them, but he'd also proved the system could work if someone just cared enough to make it work, which meant the deaths were always preventable, always a choice. The third assignment broke something inside him that would never fully heal. Penal Legion 771, 200,000 criminals and political prisoners sentenced to die on the front lines of the Damocles Gulf Crusade. Suicide charges against Tau defense lines, equipped with laser guns that barely worked, and armor held together with prayers. Standard doctrine: expend penal legions to probe enemy defenses. Expected survival rate: 0%. Kal-El's orders: Ensure Penal Legion 771 completes their assault objectives. Casualties: acceptable. He tried to interpret acceptable as minimize. Flew ahead of the charges, disabled Tau gun emplacements, shielded the prisoners from the worst fire, dragged wounded back to Medici stations. 40,000 died. 160,000 survived, more than had survived a Penal Legion assault in recorded history. The commanding general court-martialed him for insubordination. Your orders were to ensure objective completion, not maximize prisoner survival. You've created a dangerous precedent. Penal legions are meant to die. That's their punishment, their redemption through death. By saving them, you've denied them absolution. The general was serious, completely, genuinely believed every word. And the High Lords agreed. Kal-El was reassigned. The surviving prisoners were sent on another suicide mission. None survived. He'd just delayed their deaths by 3 weeks. The pattern became clear. Every assignment was designed to show him the same truth. The Imperium's cruelty wasn't accidental. It was structural, necessary. Removing one source of suffering just shifted it elsewhere. Save a world from starvation. The food has to come from somewhere. Some other world pays the price. Prevent casualties in one war zone. The troops have to be deployed elsewhere. Different soldiers die. The Imperium was a closed system, a machine that ran on human suffering as fuel, and all he could do was choose which humans suffered. Not whether they suffered, just who. The Inquisition documented every mission, every breakdown, every moment his hands shook or his eyes grew distant. They were building a psychological profile, mapping the exact process by which idealism corroded into pragmatism. How long before he started making the same calculations the Imperium made, before acceptable losses became part of his vocabulary, before he understood that sometimes you had to let people die? Month 6 of his service, they sent him to Cadia. Not the Cadia of myth, the fortress world that stood against chaos for 10,000 years. Cadia was gone, shattered by Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade. They sent him to the refugee fleets, millions of Cadians scattered across the galaxy, homeless and broken, clinging to military discipline because it was all they had left. His orders were simple and devastating. Select 10,000 Cadians for resettlement on Paradise World Meridian, remaining refugees to be processed through standard labor conscription. Standard labor conscription meant death within 5 years in manufactorums, mines, or penal battalions. He had to choose, 10,000 to save, millions to condemn. The Cadians lined up in perfect military formation, every one of them knowing the math, every one of them ready to die if necessary, because that's what Cadians did. They served. An old colonel, missing both legs and one eye, saluted him with a mechadendrite arm. "Do your duty, sir. We understand." The colonel wasn't selected. Too injured, not useful enough. Kal-El watched him march to the conscription ships with his head high, singing the Cadian anthem, and something in the Man of Steel's chest cracked like ice under pressure. The missions blurred together after that. Evacuate a hive before it collapsed, but only the upper spires, the lower hive, was economically non-viable to save. Defend a shrine world from orcs, but preserve the holy sites at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing the civilian population to do it. Rescue a cardinal from heretics, while the Cardinal's entire diocese burned because protecting one religious authority was worth more than 1 billion faithful. Each mission came with a lesson. Each lesson carved away another piece of the idealism he'd arrived with. The Imperium was teaching him in the cruelest way possible, not through torture, through responsibility, making him choose who lived and who died until the choosing became automatic. Until he stopped asking, why must anyone die, and started asking, who dies for the greatest good. That's when they knew they had him, when his questions changed from challenging the system to optimizing within it, when he became one of them. The breaking point came on an unnamed world in the Gothic sector, designation M4773. A mining world, population 2 million, standard Imperial exploitation operation. The mines were collapsing, safety protocols ignored for centuries in favor of production quotas. The miners had revolted, not asking for freedom, just asking for breathable air and structural inspections. The planetary governor's response was orbital bombardment. Kal-El's orders: suppress the rebellion, restore production within acceptable parameters. Method: your discretion. For the first time in his service, he had choice. Real choice. He could side with the miners, force reforms, make the governor treat them as humans, or he could do his duty, suppress the revolt, get the mines running, feed the war machine that never stopped consuming. He stood on the planet's surface for 6 hours, listening to the miners' demands, so simple, so reasonable, just basic safety measures, and listening to the governor's counter-argument about production quotas and Imperium needs. And then he made his choice. He suppressed the rebellion. Non-lethally, he told himself, just disabled them, returned them to the mines. The governor praised his efficiency. Production resumed within 12 hours. 2 weeks later, a mine collapse killed 800 workers. Kal-El was on the other side of the sector by then, on another mission, saving other lives, damning different souls. He didn't even hear about it until the monthly casualty reports came through. He read the number, 800, filed it away with all the other numbers, and didn't feel anything at all. That was when the Inquisition knew the experiment was complete. Inquisitor Vane reviewed the psychological assessments with something approaching satisfaction. Subject has achieved functional integration, displays standard Imperial pragmatism, acceptable loss calculations within normal parameters, emotional response to mass casualty events, minimal. Conclusion: the false angel is dead. What remains is simply another tool of the Imperium, more powerful than most, but no longer dangerous to our ideological infrastructure. Recommend continued monitored service. The report was filed. Kal-El was given his next assignment. And somewhere in the void between stars, the thing that had been Superman, the last son of a dead world who'd once believed that everyone could be saved, flew toward another war, another impossible choice, another lesson in why hope was heresy. His cape was grey now, stained by 1,000 worlds worth of ash. His eyes were blue still, but colder, distant, the eyes of someone who'd learned the hardest lesson the Imperium had to teach. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no such thing as saving everyone. There's only choosing who dies last. The believers never stopped believing. That was the tragedy the Inquisition hadn't fully anticipated. Even as Kal-El became the Imperium's obedient weapon, even as he suppressed revolts and enforced quotas and made the same brutal calculations as every Imperial commander, he faithful refused to see it. They called him the chained martyr, the saint in bondage, the god who suffers for mankind. Every world he visited spawned new cults within hours. They built shrines where he'd stood, collected dirt from his footprints, wrote prayers describing his torment as divine sacrifice, his service to the corrupt Imperium as proof of ultimate humility. The more he broke, the more they worshipped. The more he became like them, the more they saw divinity in his fall. It was the cruelest mirror the galaxy could hold up. His corruption into imperial pragmatism wasn't killing the faith, it was feeding it. The ecclesiarchy tried everything short of open war to suppress the growing Saint Kal-El cult: mass executions, theological denouncements, counter-propaganda showing his sins. Nothing worked. You can't kill faith with facts. You can only drown it in blood, and the Imperium was discovering that some faiths bleed forever. The cults evolved in disturbing directions. The Children of Tomorrow became the penitent light, flagellants who scourged themselves while chanting his name, believing suffering brought them closer to their imprisoned God. The Hands of Hope became the Chains Eternal, warriors who wore actual chains into battle, claiming each link represented one of Kal-El's impossible choices. Most disturbing were the Mirror Saints, a sect that believed the path to salvation was becoming exactly what he'd become, breaking yourself on the Imperium's wheel until there was nothing left but duty. They sought out the worst assignments, volunteered for suicide missions, choosing pragmatic evil over useless good, all while claiming they were following his example. When Inquisitor Vane showed Kal-El the picked captures of Mirror Saints executing civilians to maintain order in his name, he'd expected some reaction: horror, rage, regret. Instead, Kal-El just stared at the images with those cold, distant eyes and asked what his next assignment was. The Inquisition had created something worse than a martyr. They'd created a gospel of despair. Month 14 of his service brought him back to Mordian Prime, where it all began. The world had changed. The crater where he'd first landed was now a pilgrimage site, cordoned off by Arbeiter's enforcer walls, but still drawing millions who pressed against the barriers just to glimpse the sacred ground. The planetary governor who'd ordered his execution was dead, assassinated by cultists who'd infiltrated his guard. 3 governors had died since then. The current one ruled from an orbital station, too afraid to set foot on a planet that worshipped something other than the Emperor. Kal-El's assignment was grimly appropriate: suppress the Saint Kal-El cult on Mordian Prime, break the faith in himself, stand in the crater and tell them he was never divine, never special, just another servant of the Imperium, no different from any other weapon in Terra's arsenal. He landed in the crater at dawn, and 2 million faithful waited in silence, their eyes full of desperate hope that made him want to flee into the stars and never return. He spoke for 3 hours, voice amplified across every Vox channel on the planet, told them the truth with brutal honesty. He wasn't the Emperor reborn, wasn't sent by divine will, was just a Saut, ranger from a dead world who'd tried to help and failed. Every good he'd done had cost innocent lives. Every person he'd saved had been balanced by dozens dying elsewhere. The system couldn't be changed from within. The Imperium was what it was because the galaxy demanded it. Their faith in him was wasted. Their hope was poison. They needed to stop believing, stop resisting, stop hoping for salvation that would never come. He painted himself as the villain of his own story, confessed to the mine collapse, to choosing Cadians for death, to suppressing revolts while workers screamed for basic mercy. He gave them every reason to hate him, to spit on his name, to accept that their false angel was exactly what the Imperium claimed. When he finished, the silence was absolute. 2 million people staring at the god who'd just denied his own divinity. Then, slowly they knelt, not in rejection, in worship, in gratitude for his honesty. They called it the Sermon of Chains, the most sacred text of the Saint Kal-El cult, proof that even broken, he loved them enough to tell the truth. The Inquisition's response was swift and absolute. If he couldn't break the faith by denying himself, they'd break it by showing what he'd become. They made his next assignments public, broadcast them across every world where the cult had taken root, showed him suppressing worker strikes on Forge World Griffin 4, returning escaped slaves to their masters on Necromunda, defending a corrupt cardinal from righteous assassination attempts. Every act of imperial enforcement, every moment of pragmatic cruelty, filmed and distributed with commentary explaining this was their saint, this was their hope, this was the hero they'd staked their souls on. A functionary, a tool, a weapon that had learned to aim itself at the Imperium's enemies, even when those enemies were just people asking for mercy. The prop, a Gander, campaign should have destroyed the cult overnight. Instead, it split it. Half fell away in horror, faith shattered by the reality of what their god had become. The other half dug deeper, reinterpreting every atrocity as necessary sacrifice, every cruelty as divine wisdom they were too limited to understand. The Imperium had created two theologies of despair, both equally heretical, both impossible to eradicate. The believers who turned away from him were the ones that haunted his dreams, what few dreams he had anymore. A girl on Sanctus Prime, maybe 12 years old, who'd been healed by his touch back when he still believed healing mattered. She stood outside a Munitorium depot where he was coordinating supply chains, just stood there in silence holding a hand-carved icon of his symbol. When he emerged, she walked up to him with tears streaming down her face and handed him the icon. "I made this after you saved my mother. I prayed to it every night. Thanked you for showing me the galaxy could be kind." She paused, her small hands trembling. "I don't need it anymore. I understand now. Kindness was the lie. The Imperium was right all along. Hope was heresy." She dropped the icon at his feet and walked away, her shoulders straight, her face empty, already learning the Imperial truth. That kindness was weakness, that mercy was failure, that the only way to survive was to become as cold as the void itself. Kal-El picked up the icon, looked at the symbol carved with such care, such love, such wasted faith. He crushed it to dust and continued with his assignment. Efficiency, pragmatism, duty. The words that replaced every other word he'd once believed in. Year 2 of his service brought the worst assignment yet, not because of what it required, but because of who it involved. Sanctus Prime had descended into civil war, loyalists versus St. Kal-El cultists, 10 trillion people tearing themselves apart over whether he was savior or fraud. The death toll was approaching the billions. The Imperium's solution was standard: exterminatus. Virus bomb the entire planet, cauterize the infection. But the High Lords had a better idea, a final lesson in the education of hope. They sent Kal-El to do it, gave him the virus bomb codes, made him responsible for killing 10 trillion people, including every soul who'd ever believed in him, every cultist who'd prayed in his name, every child who'd been taught that once, briefly, the galaxy had known mercy. The orders were explicit. Deploy virus bombs across Sanctus Prime, total sterilization required, no survivors, execute immediately. He flew to Sanctus Prime with the bomb codes in his hand and death in his heart, and below him, 10 trillion believers looked up at their saint descending like judgment itself. He held position above the planet for 18 hours, long enough that the Inquisition began preparing to detonate the bombs remotely. Long enough that the cultists below began broadcasting prayers, begging their god for salvation one last time. Long enough that even the loyalist forces stopped fighting and just waited to see if the false angel would save them or condemn them. Kal-El stared at the planet through vision that could see continents, could read individual faces in the crowds below, could count every believer who'd staked their soul on the hope he represented. And he realized the cruelest truth of all. The Imperium was right, not about hope being heresy, about hope being impossible. If he refused, they'd detonate anyway, and his defiance meant nothing. If he complied, he proved that hope had always been a lie, that mercy was just weakness wearing a cape, that the only truth in the galaxy was power and the willingness to use it. Either way, Sanctus Prime burned. Either way, hope died. The only choice was whether he died with it or learned to live in its ashes. He entered the bomb codes. Sanctus Prime died screaming his name, and the Man of Steel discovered you can break without shattering. You just become something else, something hollow, something that can watch 10 trillion souls burn and feel nothing at all except the cold comfort of duty fulfilled. 3 years after Sanctus Prime, Kal-El had become what the Imperium always intended, not a hero, an asset. Designation, tactical asset. Kal-El, Omega classification, deployed at the discretion of the High Lords for crisis situations requiring overwhelming force and absolute loyalty. The psychological reports had stabilized, no emotional variance, no questioning of orders, no hesitation regardless of civilian cost. The transformation was complete and documented across 400 pages of inquisitorial analysis. Subject displays all markers of successful imperial conditioning, the final report concluded. Emotional attachment to individuals, minimal. Capacity for hope, eliminated. Threat to imperial stability, negligible. Recommended status, permanent deployment. He was everything they'd wanted. A god who'd learned to kneel, a weapon that aimed itself. And across the Imperium, in the shadows where the Inquisition couldn't reach, people whispered his name as a warning. This is what happens when you hope. This is the price the galaxy demands. Even angels fall, even gods break, even light learns to serve darkness. The assignments became routine in their horror. Warzone Armageddon, Third War, casualties mounting into the billions. Kal-El deployed to hold the Hive Hades Gate for 6 weeks straight while reinforcements arrived. He held it, became a living wall between the orcs and humanity, catching bullets and blades and artillery until his suit was more ash than fabric. Behind him, 3 billion souls survived to be conned, scripted into the next wave of defenders. In front of him, the orc corpses piled so high they created new geography. When he finally withdrew, there was no celebration, just the next deployment order. Hive Fleet Jormungandr, Eastern Fringe, consuming 3 systems per month. Kal-El deployed to evacuation operations, carrying colony ships that would have taken weeks to evacuate through standard means. He saved 4 billion, left 6 billion behind because the math said those worlds were already lost. Watched from orbit as the Tyranids devoured them, filing casualty reports while screams echoed through Vox channels he couldn't turn off even if he wanted to. The worst deployments were the ones that didn't involve Xenos or Chaos, the internal ones, the reminder that the Imperium's greatest enemy was often itself. Hive World Volturis, Manufactorum Uprising, workers demanding what they called basic rights, breathable air, non-toxic water, shifts under 18 hours. The planetary governor's response was orbital bombardment of the worker districts. Kal-El's orders: ensure no survivors reach the mid-spire to threaten essential production infrastructure. He created a perimeter, living wall between the burning underhive and the spires above, caught the refugees trying to escape, returned them to their deaths, his face expressionless while they screamed his name. Some cursed him, some still believed he was testing their faith. Others just begged. He processed them all with the same mechanical efficiency. By dawn, 7 million workers were dead. Production resumed by afternoon. The governor commended his performance. Kal-El filed his after-action report and moved to the next assignment without acknowledging the commendation. Emotions were inefficient. Pride was pointless. There was only duty, only the mission, only the endless grind of choosing which humans died so other humans could continue the species' slow crawl toward extinction. The Inquisition monitored him constantly, waiting for signs of relapse. Moments of mercy that would indicate the old programming surfacing. They found none. He'd internalized the lesson perfectly. The galaxy was a zero-sum equation. Every life saved cost a life somewhere else. The only moral choice was maximizing Imperial survival, and the Imperium survived through strength, and strength required sacrifice. He'd become the perfect instrument of that philosophy. When ordered to destroy a rebellious shrine world that refused to meet its tithe quotas, he did it without hesitation. When commanded to retrieve an Inquisitor from a demon-infested hulk while leaving a guard regiment to die buying time, he made the calculation instantly. 1 Inquisitor's knowledge versus 1 regiment's manpower. The math favored the Inquisitor. Decision made. The fact that the guardsmen had families, dreams, fears, irrelevant variables. Efficiency demanded their exclusion from consideration. He retrieved the Inquisitor. The regiment died to the last soldier. The Inquisitor's intelligence prevented 3 planets from falling to chaos. The math worked. The system worked. Everything worked if you just stopped caring about individuals and focused on the species. But the galaxy noticed what the Inquisition couldn't. Chaos, especially. The Dark Gods. Watched the fallen angel with interest bordering on obsession. Not because he'd turned to chaos, he remained utterly incorruptible by warp standards, his soul somehow immune to their touch, but because he'd proven something they'd argued about since the war in heaven. That corruption didn't require the warp, that hope could be destroyed without replacing it with chaos worship, that you could break a being so completely they became evil without becoming corrupted. He was the counterexample to everything the chaos gods represented. Proof that darkness didn't need them, that the materium could create its own despair, its own cruelty, its own damnation through simple pragmatism and endless compromise. Tzeentch found it fascinating. Nurgle found it depressing even by his standards. Horn found it insulting. Violence without passion was just mechanics. Slaanesh found it boring. Suffering without pleasure was wasted potential. But they all agreed on one thing. Kal-El represented something more dangerous than any champion of chaos. Proof that you could serve evil without ever acknowledging it as evil. Just call it duty, necessity, survival, the math. The turning point nobody expected came in year 4, not from within, from outside. The Tau Empire, ever observant, ever calculating, made contact, not through war, through communication. A watercast delegation broadcast on frequencies they knew only he could hear, offering something the Imperium never had, a choice. We have studied you, Kal-El of Terra, watched your integration into Imperial service, analyzed your transformation from idealist to pragmatist. We understand what they've done to you, what you've become. The greater good offers an alternative. Join the Tau Empire. Use your power in service of genuine progress. We don't ask for hope. We offer rational optimization of sentient well-being. No false promises, just mathematical reduction of suffering through cooperation and technology. You proved the Imperium's cruelty is unnecessary. Come prove an alternative is possible. The message repeated for 6 hours before inquisitorial jamming killed it. But Kal-El heard every word, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt something other than cold duty, not hope. Worse, doubt. The question he'd buried beneath 400 missions and 1 trillion deaths. What if there was another way? The Inquisition detected the variance immediately. Elevated heart rate during the Tau broadcast, delayed response time on the next 3 missions, delays measured in microseconds but still measurable, pupil dilation when reviewing casualty reports, suggesting emotional processing instead of pure data analysis. They convened an emergency tribunal, not to judge him, to decide whether to terminate him before he became dangerous again. Inquisitor Vane argued for termination. The subject shows signs of ideological reversion. The Tau message triggered dormant hope patterns we believed eliminated. He's becoming unstable. Recommendation: immediate execution before he becomes a liability. But Lord Commander Kroger disagreed, seeing opportunity where Vane saw threat. Let him doubt. Let him wonder if the Tau are right. Then deploy him against them. Make him see firsthand what their greater good actually costs. Nothing breaks a man's faith like watching his alternative revealed as another lie. We didn't break him by proving the Imperium was right. We broke him by proving everything was wrong. Let's finish the lesson. The vote was close, but Kroger's argument won. Kal-El was deployed to the Damocles Gulf to face the civilization that offered him hope's corpse, wearing a different name. The flight to the T. Old Border gave him too much time to think. Something he'd learned not to do. Thinking was where doubt lived, and doubt made you hesitate, and hesitation got people killed. But the Tau's words echoed in his mind like poison. Mathematical reduction of suffering through cooperation. Was it possible? Could a civilization actually function without grinding its own people into paste? Or was the Tau Empire just better at hiding the bodies, better at making slavery look like cooperation? He'd seen the Imperium's brutality up close, participated in it, become it, but he'd never seen the alternative, never tested whether the horror was necessary or chosen. The doubt ate at him like acid, corroding the cold certainty he'd wrapped around himself like armor. By the time he reached the Tau border world of Town, his hands were shaking again, not from fear, from the possibility that everything he'd done, every compromise, every atrocity, every choice that had killed his soul, might have been avoidable. That the Imperium had broken him not to teach him truth, but to make him complicit in a lie. And if that was true, if there had been another way all along, then Sanctus Prime died for nothing. The miners died for nothing. The little girl who stopped believing in kindness, she was right for the wrong reasons. Hope wasn't heresy. Hope was just murdered, and he'd held the knife. Town was beautiful in a way that made his chest hurt. Clean streets without corpse starch factories, citizens moving freely without Arbeits patrols on every corner, children playing instead of working. The air didn't taste like industrial waste. The sky was blue, actual blue, not the chemical grey he'd come to accept as normal. He floated above the city invisible, using speed to avoid detection, just watching, studying. The Tau had built something that looked like what he'd imagined when he first arrived in this galaxy. Order without oppression, progress without sacrifice. The greater good made manifest in architecture and smiling faces. It looked like hope. It looked like everything the Imperium claimed was impossible, and that terrified him more than any demon ever had. Because if this was real, if a civilization could actually function this way, then every choice he'd made in the Imperium's service had been wrong. Not tragic, not necessary, just wrong. He spent 3 days observing before making contact, watched the Firecast train without beating recruits to death, saw the Earthcast build without slave labor, witnessed the Watercast negotiate disputes without executions. The Tau weren't perfect. He could see the propaganda, the social conditioning, the way dissent was gently redirected rather than violently suppressed. But it was gentle. That was the key difference. When someone questioned the greater good, they received education, not a bolt round to the skull. When workers had concerns, they were addressed through counsel rather than crushed by orbital bombardment. It was manipulation, yes, but velvet manipulation instead of iron. Control through belonging rather than fear. And it worked. The citizens weren't happy because they were ignorant. They were happy because the system actually functioned to minimize suffering. The math worked, just like the Imperium's math worked, except the variables were different. Where the Imperium optimized for survival at any cost, the Tau optimized for quality of life within survival parameters. Same game, different equation. Both claimed theirs was the only answer. The Watercast delegation found him on the 4th day, or rather he let them find him. Porui Tau Shaiz, her name translated roughly to she who bridges understanding, approached without fear despite knowing what he could do. She carried no weapons, brought no honor guard, just herself and a data slate containing 4 years of compiled research on his actions in Imperial service. We know what you've done, Kal-El. Every mission, every casualty, every compromise that carved away pieces of your soul. We don't judge you. We understand you are optimizing within a flawed system. The Imperium's equation requires cruelty because it's based on scarcity and fear. The greater good offers abundance and cooperation, not through divine intervention, through practical application of resource management and social cohesion. You could help us, prove that power can serve life instead of death. The Imperium will call this betrayal. We call it evolution. She was good, very good, hit every logical point, avoided emotional manipulation, presented data showing Tau worlds had lower casualty rates, higher life expectancy, better quality of life across every measurable metric. It was compelling. It was rational. It was exactly what he needed to hear, which was why he didn't trust it. "Show me the auxilia worlds," he said. The Porui's expression didn't change, but he saw the micro-hesitation, the brief calculation behind her eyes. Of course, transparency serves the greater good. Follow. They flew to Dalith Sept, an auxiliary world populated by humans who'd joined the Tau Empire generations ago. The city was clean, orderly, prosperous by YT. Imperial standards. But Kal-El had learned to look beneath surfaces. He saw the Tau overseers monitoring every sector, saw the way human auxilia deferred to Tau citizens in every interaction, noticed the propaganda was just as pervasive as the Imperium's, just prettier. The humans here had food, medicine, education, everything the Imperium denied them. But they also had masters, benevolent masters who genuinely believed they were helping, who followed a philosophy that said some species were better equipped to lead and others to follow. It wasn't slavery. It was structured cooperation with predetermined outcomes. The humans smiled. They seemed content. And why wouldn't they be? Compared to the Imperium, this was paradise. But compared to freedom, compared to genuine equality, it was just a nicer cage. He spent a week on Dalith, talking to humans who'd lived under both Imperium and Tau. Their stories were depressingly consistent. The Tau were better, unquestionably, measurably, objectively better than the Imperium. Life expectancy tripled, infant mortality decreased 90%, education was universal, no one starved, no one was worked to death. The quality of life improvement was so dramatic it looked like a different species, but there was a cost they rarely mentioned, or had learned not to mention, or genuinely didn't see as a cost: ambition. The humans on Daleth could rise in Tau society, but only so far, could participate in decisions, but never lead, could contribute to the greater good, but always as auxiliaries, never as equals. The Tau caste system wasn't racial in the hateful sense. They genuinely believed they were helping, that their biological specialization made them natural leaders. But belief in superiority, even scientifically justified superiority, was still superiority. The Imperium crushed you because it saw you as expendable. The Tau guided you because so they saw you as limited. Different philosophies, similar results. You just chose which boot wore softer leather. The revelation came when he watched a human auxiliar council meeting. 20 representatives debating resource allocation, arguing passionately about community needs. It looked democratic. It looked fair. Then a single Tau watercaste observer stood and suggested an alternative allocation. The debate stopped. Every human representative immediately agreed with the Tau's suggestion. Not because it was obviously better, it wasn't. The original human proposal was solid. They agreed because that's what you did. The Tau knew better. The Tau always knew better. It was so ingrained, so thoroughly conditioned, they didn't even see it as conditioning. The Tau observer dismissed the meeting. The humans left satisfied, and Kal-El understood. The greater good wasn't a lie. It was something worse. It was a truth that only worked if everyone accepted their predetermined role. Chaos was corrupting freedom. The Imperium was honest tyranny. The Tau were benevolent authoritarianism. 3 different answers to the same question: how do you make humans survive themselves? And all 3 answers required controlling them. The variables changed, the equation didn't. Porui Shais found him that night, standing on a cliff overlooking Daleth's capital. "You're disappointed," she said. "Not a question. You hoped we were different, better. We are better, by every practical measure. But we're not what you wanted. You wanted genuine equality, true freedom, systems that respected individual will while maintaining collective benefit. That's impossible, not philosophically, mathematically. Sentient behavior tends toward chaos. Structure requires hierarchy. Optimization requires specialization. The greater good is the best answer because it minimizes suffering while maximizing potential. We don't claim morale, superiority. We claim practical effectiveness." She was right, completely mathematically, devastatingly right. And that's what broke him again. Not her words, the realization that she was offering him the same choice the Imperium had. Accept that suffering is inevitable. Choose the system that minimizes it most efficiently. Stop asking if there's a better way. The Imperium's answer was cruelty as necessity. The Tau's answer was control as kindness. Both asked the same thing: surrender the dream that things could be truly different. Just pick your preferred flavor of compromise. He left Daleth without saying goodbye, flew back toward Imperial space while the Tau delegation transmitted offers, data, arguments, everything except what he actually needed. Permission to believe the galaxy could be saved without controlling it. Permission to think that maybe, somewhere, somehow, there was an answer that didn't require choosing who suffered less. That hope wasn't just mathematics in different clothes. He crossed back into Imperial space expecting to be arrested, executed, declared traitor. Instead, he received a Vox transmission from Inquisitor Vane, short, direct, satisfied. "Report to Terra. Lord Commander Kroiger wishes to commend your service. You've learned the final lesson. There are no good choices in this galaxy, only necessary ones. Welcome home, asset. Your education is complete." And Kal-El understood the trap's final spring. The Imperium had sent him to the Tau not to lose him, but to kill the last ember of doubt. To prove that even the alternatives were just different shades of the same darkness. That the galaxy's equation couldn't be changed, only optimized. That he'd been right to surrender, right to compromise, right to become the hollow thing that chose who died, because everyone else who tried to be better had failed too. The Imperium won, not with chains, with proof that chains were the only option. He didn't return to Terra, not immediately. Instead, he flew to the edge of the galaxy, beyond the Astronomican's light, where the stars thinned and the void grew deep. He needed to think without the weight of worlds pressing down, without Vox channels screaming for help he could never truly give, without the machinery of civilization grinding souls into acceptable losses. Out here, in the empty dark between galaxies, he could finally admit the truth he'd been running from since Sanctus Prime burned. He was tired, not physically. His body didn't tire, couldn't tire, absorbed stellar radiation and converted it to endless energy. He was tired in his soul, tired of choosing, tired of calculating, tired of being the knife that cut away pieces of humanity so the rest could survive another day. 4 years of service, hundreds of worlds, trillions of deaths he'd caused, enabled or failed to prevent. And what had it accomplished? The Imperium ground on, unchanged, unchallenged, eternal in its cruelty because the galaxy demanded it. He'd tried to change it, failed, tried to accept it, succeeded, and the success felt like damnation. The Imperium's Vox channels buzzed with increasingly urgent summons, terror demanding his return, war zones requesting deployment, the machine that never stopped needing its weapon back in the arsenal. He ignored them all, let them escalate, let them threaten, let them send entire fleets to retrieve him if they wanted. Out here, beyond the edge of everything, he had time to remember who he'd been before the galaxy taught him better. Kal-El of Krypton, last son of a dead world, raised by farmers who'd taught him that power meant responsibility, that strength meant protection, that no matter how impossible the situation, you never stop trying to save everyone. The Kents would have been horrified by what he'd become, what he'd allowed himself to become, not corrupted by chaos, not broken by torture, just convinced, persuaded through logic and attrition that mercy was mathematics and hope was heresy, and the only moral choice was optimizing which innocents died. He wondered if they'd forgive him. Probably. They'd always forgiven everything. That's what made their memory hurt so much. He couldn't forgive himself. The vision came on the 7th day of his exile, though whether it was real or hallucination born of exhaustion and guilt, he'd never know. The Emperor, not as he was now, the corpse god rotting on the golden throne, as he'd been, supposedly, during the Great Crusade, resplendent in gold, radiating purpose, a being of such power that reality bent around him like light around a star. The vision didn't speak, just looked at him with eyes that held 10,000 years of sacrifice and asked a silent question. Was it worth it? All the cruelty, all the deaths, all the grinding horror of the Imperium's existence, did it save humanity or just prolong its suffering? Kal-El couldn't answer, didn't know how to answer. The vision smiled, sad and knowing, and dissolved into the void, but its presence left something behind, not hope, not even advice, just recognition. The Emperor had made the same choice once, tried to save humanity through force and will and impossible power, built an imperium on the promise that if humans just obeyed, just sacrificed, just believed hard enough, salvation would come. 10,000 years later, the promise hadn't delivered. The galaxy was darker than ever, and the god who'd claimed he could save them all sat trapped on a throne, neither living nor dead, watching his dream consume itself forever. He finally understood why the Emperor couldn't just die, why the High Lords kept him bound to the Golden Throne despite the endless agony. The Emperor was the Imperium's excuse. As long as he existed, suffering, enduring, sacrificing, the Imperium could claim his will justified everything. Every atrocity became necessary for his plan. Every death became sacrifice for his vision. If he died, the Imperium would have to face what it had become without divine justification. Just humans choosing cruelty because it was easier than finding alternatives. The Emperor's torture wasn't just maintaining the Astronomican, it was maintaining the lie that all this suffering meant something, that there was a plan, that 10,000 years of grinding darkness would eventually lead to light. Kal-El saw himself in that vision, saw what he'd become, the Imperium's new excuse, the false angel who'd tried hope and learned better, living proof that mercy failed, that kindness killed, that the only path forward was through necessary evil. They'd keep him alive, keep him serving, keep trotting him out whenever someone questioned whether the cruelty was required. Look at the alien god, they'd say. Even he learned to compromise. Even he learned to calculate acceptable losses. If beings of infinite power can't change the system, what makes you think you can? The choice crystallized with painful clarity. He could return to Imperial service, accept his role as the weapon that proved hope was mathematical fiction, spend the rest of eternity watching civilizations burn and filing casualty reports, optimizing which humans died so others could continue the species' slow extinction. The Imperium would love him for it, give him honors, write him into doctrine, the saint who learned necessity, the angel who fell to save us. They'd corrupt his memory the same way they'd corrupted the emperor's, turning his surrender into virtue and his exhaustion into divine wisdom. Or he could do the one thing the galaxy couldn't accommodate, the one choice the Imperium couldn't calculate or control or corrupt. He could leave, not flee, not hide, just stop. Stop fighting, stop choosing, stop being the impossible variable that forced everyone to recalculate their equations. Let the galaxy solve itself or destroy itself without his interference. It was the most selfish thing he'd ever considered, abandoning quadrillions who needed help. Walking away from suffering he had the power to ease. Every instinct the Kents had trained into him screamed that leaving was wrong, that you never gave up, that one person could make a difference. But he'd tried that. For 4 years he'd made differences, and every difference he made, the Imperium weaponized or corrupted or used to justify its own horror. So he made his choice. Not the noble one, not the heroic one, the exhausted one. He began to fly, not toward any destination in particular, just away, away from terror, away from the Imperium, away from the galaxy that had spent 4 years teaching him that hope was heresy and kindness was cruelty and power just meant choosing who suffered. He flew faster than light, faster than thought, pushing his speed until the stars became lines and the void became white, searching for the edge of this cursed galaxy, for the wall of intergalactic space where maybe, possibly, something different existed. Another galaxy with different rules, another universe where Arcee wasn't mathematics, or nothing at all, just void, empty, clean, dark void, where he couldn't hurt anyone or help anyone or be weaponized against the thing he'd tried to become. Behind him, the Imperium erupted in chaos. Without their prize asset, without the false angel who'd proven hope failed, the cracks in the Imperial doctrine opened again. The believers who'd watched him fall had learned despair. Now they learned its opposite. Even gods could refuse. Even the broken could choose. Even the Imperium couldn't hold forever what it had claimed was willing service. The Vox transmissions followed him for 6 months. Threats, pleas, orders, promises of redemption or destruction, depending on who sent the message. He ignored them all. Eventually, they stopped. The Imperium declared him dead, killed in the Tau conflict, martyred in service to terror, built monuments to the false angel who'd learned to serve, wrote prayers celebrating his transformation from heretic to saint, made his surrender into scripture, his exhaustion into devotion, his leaving into sacrifice. They needed the story, needed the lesson, needed proof that even infinite power learned to kneel, so they created it. Historical revisionism at galactic scale. Within a century, most Imperial records showed Kal-El dying heroically during the Third Damocles Crusade, his last words a prayer to the Emperor. Only the Inquisition kept the truth buried in Omega-level archives. That he'd simply left, chosen nothing over everything, proved that the galaxy's greatest weakness wasn't chaos or Xenos or heresy. It was the moment when someone with infinite power looked at all the impossible choices and said no, not to evil, not to good, to the game itself. Centuries later, in the dark places between the Imperium's light, people still whispered stories about a figure in a tattered cape, seen at the edges of dying stars, watching civilizations rise and fall without intervening. Some called him a ghost, others called him a warning. A few, the ones who still remembered what hope felt like before the galaxy taught them better, called him something different. They called him the Watcher. The god who loved humanity enough to save it, and wise enough to know he couldn't. Some nights, on worlds where suffering had ground hope into dust, children would look up at the stars and imagine a blue glow moving between them, moving away, always away, forever searching for a galaxy that deserved saving, or the peace of finding none at all. In the grim darkness of the far future, even gods learn when to surrender, not to their enemies, to the understanding that some galaxies are beyond redemption, that some evils are too structural to defeat, that sometimes the kindest thing infinite power can do is nothing at all, and so the star that wouldn't die simply stopped burning, leaving behind only the memory of what hope looked like before the universe broke it, before it learned to break itself,